on Fox 28 News at 9.
Another mass shooting and another community left in shock.
You don't know where the bullets are coming from exactly. You don't know if you're going to get the bullet next.
New reports from Ohio, as well as Texas, where authorities vowed justice after a man allegedly launched a racist terror attack.
We're going to do what we do to terrorists in this country, which is deliver swift and certain justice.
And for the second night, we began the newscast with news of a man armed to the teeth, taking as many lives as possible. This latest act of unthinkable terror took place during a night of fun in Dayton, Ohio. It comes just 13 hours after another man allegedly gunned down 20 people at a Texas Walmart because of his hatred of Hispanics. Now, as the shock subsides, the calls for action are growing. We have complete team coverage for you tonight. Joe Galley is in El Paso, where a community is still trying to make sense of the terror one person caused. Zach Hedrick reports just outside of Dallas with new information on the man who pulled the trigger, injuring or killing dozens. And Angelica Alvarez is on Capitol Hill, where many say it is time for America's leaders to act. But we began with Anjanette Levy in Dayton, Ohio, the latest town to see a normal night turned into deadly chaos. Now we go back to Texas, where we are learning more tonight about the men and women gunned down during a Saturday shopping trip. Fox 28 News team coverage continues now with reporter Joe Galley in El Paso tonight, where they are honoring the fallen. We're also learning more about that man authorities say traveled hours from his home, seemingly targeting a place he knew many Mexicans and Latinos would be. Team coverage continues now with Fox 28 News reporter Zach Hedrick near Dallas, Texas. The El Paso suspect allegedly posted a racist manifesto just minutes before yesterday's massacre on a website known as 8chan. The site is a messaging board with virtually no restrictions, making it a popular stop for conspiracy theorists, racists, and terrorists to share their views. Besides El Paso, the suspected gunman in the New Zealand mosque attacks in March also posted to the site shortly before killing 50. 1 month later, racist writings on the site allegedly inspired a California man to commit murder at a synagogue and then allegedly set fire to a mosque. Earlier this year, the creator of 8chan, who no longer operates the site, told the Wall Street Journal he regrets creating it. Now, within hours of yesterday's shooting in Texas, the calls for action were growing far and wide. Many took their voices straight to our nation's capital late last night. The group Moms Demand Action marched to the Capitol and the White House. The group is calling for new gun control measures to curb the number of mass shootings. Leaders say, quote, "If our lawmakers won't act, make no mistake, we will replace them with those who will." So the question now is, will lawmakers do something to address this issue with legislation? It is something that has failed just about every time in the past 25 years. Our team coverage continues now in the aftermath of these two deadly mass shootings with Fox 28 News national correspondent Angelica Alvarez. Now, I reached out to Iowa's members of Congress for their reaction, and some are calling for the legislative branch to do something about attacks like these. Congressman Dave Loebsack tells me, quote, "The Senate must immediately come back in session to bring up the common sense gun safety legislation the House passed earlier this year. These communities have suffered enough. We cannot allow these tragedies to continue." And Congresswoman Abby Finkenauer tells me, quote, "I'm heartbroken and angry that it has been months since the House of Representatives passed bipartisan common sense gun violence prevention legislation. The Senate has refused to touch either bill. To Majority Leader McConnell and other senators blocking this legislation, Americans want to know, who do you represent?" I also reached out to Senators Chuck Grassley and Joni Ernst, but their offices have not responded. You can follow the very latest on the mass shootings around the clock on our website, or you can download our smartphone app. Just search for KGAN CBS2 in the App Store. Tonight, we want to take you through the growing scandal surrounding President Trump and his phone conversations with world leaders. Now, this all started when a whistleblower alerted intelligence officials of allegedly disturbing remarks made by the president while speaking to the president of Ukraine, asking for dirt on a political rival. Now, with new information released by the White House, Democrats have launched an impeachment inquiry into the president. That is not impeachment. That would come after an investigation and the approval of articles of impeachment drafted by the House Judiciary Committee. But there are a few key players that you need to know about beyond the president. First is the president's personal attorney, former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani. For days now, Giuliani says he was in Ukraine digging up dirt on Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, and that the U.S. State Department knew what he was doing. That includes America's special envoy to Ukraine, Kurt Volker, who has now resigned. The big question on this front is whether the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, knew about Giuliani's actions overseas. Today, Giuliani said Pompeo was not involved, but he was aware.
Mr. Volker did, and then Mr. Sondland did. But when I talked to the Secretary last week, he said he was aware of it.
Now, Democrats in the House have already issued subpoenas demanding documents from Secretary Pompeo about all of this. The subpoena warrants failure to comply with the order by the end of the week would be considered evidence of obstruction of justice. As for Giuliani and the whistleblower documents, Democrats will begin taking depositions from others on Wednesday. Now, although several sources inside the White House are sharing details of other questionable actions by the president, including telling Russian diplomats he's not concerned about their meddling in American elections, the president still has his staunch supporters. One is Stephen Miller, who accused the whistleblower of being part of a deep state targeting the president.
Gigantic scandal that nobody has unearthed? The president is the whistleblower here. The president of the United States is the whistleblower. And this individual is a saboteur trying to undermine a democratically elected government.
Now, comments like that are likely part of the reason that tonight the whistleblower's attorneys have released a letter sent to the intelligence agency raising concern for their client's safety and claims some are now offering a $50,000 bounty for information about their client. Now, earlier tonight here on CBS 2 on 60 Minutes, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi discussed her decision to launch the impeachment inquiry on this issue.
Your Republican colleagues say, well, the call is the call, but there's nothing here that rises to the level of high crimes and misdemeanors.
Well, they're wrong. And it remains to be seen, because it's not just what happens in the call. It's part of the sequencing of events as well. You withdraw a couple $100 million worth of assistance to a country, and then a couple of days later say, by the way, can you help me with my campaign, in other words. There's a sequencing there.
So as Democrats vow to get to the bottom of all this, potentially turning President Trump into the third commander-in-chief to face an impeachment trial, support for their action thus far is growing. A new CBS News YouGov poll finds 55% of Americans surveyed support the impeachment inquiry of President Trump. That includes 23% of Republican voters and 49% of independents. The poll also found support for impeachment at 42%, with 22% saying it's too soon to tell. But the poll also found 43% of Americans say former Vice President Joe Biden's actions in Ukraine, while in office, still deserve more attention. Now, the reason there's so many questions around the former vice president, now running for president himself, is his role in getting the top prosecutor in Ukraine fired, while Biden's son Hunter was on the board of a company under investigation for corruption. That issue was the source of strong debate this morning between CNN's Jake Tapper and Republican Congressman Jim Jordan.
Did he get paid $50,000 a month?
He was paid by a foreign company. Yeah, he was paid by Burisma. But Joe Biden was trying to get a prosecutor who was not pursuing corruption fired. And it was supported.
It's amazing the gymnastics you guys will go through to defend what. Do you really think the vice president?
It's facts. And I would think somebody who's been accused of things in the last year and two would be more sensitive about throwing out wild allegations against people.
I'm not throwing out wild. I'm throwing out the facts.
The prosecutor was not pursuing corruption. That's why the entire West wanted him fired, including anti-corruption activists in Ukraine. I don't understand what you don't get about that.
Now, later, Tapper tried to get the congressman to explain the difference between Hunter Biden's business dealings overseas and President Trump's family.
The president's daughter right now is having all sorts of copyrights granted in foreign countries. That doesn't alarm you. The president's sons are doing all sorts of business all over the world. That doesn't alarm you. What's come on? Either there's a principle that people should not benefit from their connections, or there isn't.
The previous administration's FBI went after this president.
I understand you want to change the subject, but the president was pushing the president of Ukraine to investigate a political rival. I cannot believe that that is okay with you. I can't believe it's okay with you. If this is a principle...
It's not okay because he didn't, but he didn't do that.
It's in the transcript. We all read it.
I read the transcript.
He says that the Bidens need to be investigated.
That's what you guys do. You guys don't read things in context.
So here's a little bit of context in all of this. After Russia invaded and annexed the country's Crimea region, Vice President Biden traveled to Ukraine to support the new pro-Western government there. 1 month later, Biden's son Hunter was appointed to the board of an energy company that was already under investigation. At the time, the Obama administration said there was no conflict because Hunter is a private citizen and can work for whomever he wants. Nearly 2 years later, under pressure from Biden, the White House, and several other countries, Ukraine fired its top prosecutor for failing to crack down on corruption. 10 months later, the investigation into the company Hunter Biden worked for was dropped after sitting dormant for years before Joe Biden ever got involved. So with all the back and forth going on in Washington about the impeachment inquiry, we wanted to give you a unique perspective on all this. And to help us is Barry Jackson. He graduated from the University of Iowa in 1983. For 10 years, he served as chief of staff for then Republican Congressman John Boehner. Then he spent several years at the White House as deputy chief of staff under President George W. Bush, and later returned to his old job when John Boehner was Speaker of the House. Jackson joined me to discuss the current state of affairs in Washington, including accusations of a deep state. It's a place that obviously is always partisan, but you know, you were there in the 90s during another bitter impeachment battle. How does this really compare to all of that?
So I'll tell you, it's much different in this sense. The people choosing up sides and partisan, that's always been there. It is just amplified by how technology has expanded people's voices.
There's been a lot of talk, not so much from those who are supporting the president about the substance of what's coming out of the impeachment inquiry, but the process of the impeachment inquiry. Is there something wrong with this process and how it's being played out? Because as I understand it, many of the rules they're operating under were drafted and approved by Speaker Boehner 4 years ago.
There are no set rules for impeachment in the House. The Speaker of the House has enormous power. We're in uncharted territory, but the House, the Speaker is perfectly within her rights to operate that way as a matter of law and procedure. I think she's making a mistake politically. This doesn't tend to give a lot of confidence in the investigation, which is what she's going to need if they actually move to impeach.
Regardless of an outcome, an impeachment process was incredibly divisive 20 years ago. If we go down that road again, as we are right now, where does this end regardless of who's president in a year and a half from now? Because it seems like that this battle will only accelerate more and more in that environment of, you know, everyone running to their corners of news punditry and all that. So where does this finally turn around?
So if I had a guess, you know, as I look at the core problem here, is the average American has lost trust and confidence in the institutions of governance. In the long run, it may take a for real crisis to solve this, or that someone will come up on stage who carries the respect of the nation to say, enough, we're better than this.
Is there really a deep state that is operating against a particular president at any time?
So I want to be careful about this because you can go down the path of conspiracy really quickly. But I will tell you, I think even President Obama's White House staff would say that the men and women that serve as permanent staff all over the government, whether it's the Agriculture Department or it's the CIA, it's frustrating because when you're in the White House, you want things to move quick, right? And the president takes a decision, let's go. And it can get bogged down. And so it's easy to get frustrated with that bureaucracy. Do I think that there is a concerted effort? It's hard to believe. I mean, the federal government is so big, it's hard to keep those kind of secrets. And generally, those kind of conspiracies, you know, if something happens, it's more an accident than a premeditated kind of maneuver.
If there's one thing that the average viewer here in Eastern Iowa would be surprised to hear about what goes on behind closed doors in Washington, what would that be?
The men and women that serve on the opposite side of the aisle from where their political views might be, by and large, all of them are really good people. They're there trying to do the right thing. They all have the same kind of, I want what's best for America. I just have a different path to get there. And most members of Congress get along just fine.
That was Barry Jackson, University of Iowa graduate and longtime public servant on Capitol Hill. You can see our entire conversation by going to our website, fox28iowa.com.